They made him kneel before the crowd. His wrists were bound, his grey head bowed low as the scorn of the capital rained down on him like rot and filth. The bells of Baelor's sept rang behind him, distant and cold. He could still hear Sansa, sobbing somewhere in the mob, still feel the phantom weight of Arya's small fingers gripping his sleeve from that last night in the Tower of the Hand, before she vanished. Before everything turned to ash, Joffrey's voice sliced through the noise like a dagger. The boy king, barely more than a child, stood with a smugness that chilled Ned more than any wind from the north. "My mother wants him to take the black," Joffrey sneered. "But I am the king, and the king says heads will roll." Gasps echoed like thunder. Cersei stepped forward, whispering fiercely into her son's ear. Varys shifted in place. Even the hound raised his eyes from the dirt. Ned felt his body tense. So this was it. But then, unexpectedly, the queen bowed her head to the boy. Joffrey squirmed in his seat, annoyed and undecided. Finally, with a childish pout and a flick of his fingers, he relented. "Very well. Let the traitor take the black. Let him rot on that frozen wall until the crows pick his bones." And just like that, his death was traded for a life in chains. They paraded him through the streets of King's Landing in a black hood, the crowd throwing rotten fruit, spitting, cursing his name. To the common folk, he was a traitor, the man who tried to steal the throne from their boy king. The North called him honorable, the South called him coward, and he said nothing. The road north was long and cold. Nights passed in silence. He shared a cage cart with two petty thieves and a disgraced knight who wouldn't speak his name. A crow from Castle Black rode alongside, watching him like a hawk. His wrists were finally unbound only when they crossed into the Giftlands, where the trees grew thicker and the air tasted of snow and blood. Castle Black loomed ahead like a grave, cold, dead, waiting. The gates opened. The Black brothers eyed him with a mix of fear and awe. Some recognized him. Lord Stark, Warden of the North. Others only knew what they'd heard: traitor, liar, oathbreaker. He said none of it was true. But it didn't matter. Bow your head, take the vow, speak the words. He was no longer Lord Eddard Stark. He was just Ned, a man in black, a sword in the darkness, and the wall would be his tombstone. Yet even there, in the shadows of the wall, whispers found him. Jon was still there, his son, his blood. But how could he face him? How could he explain why honor had brought only death and shame? That night, Ned stood atop the wall, staring into the endless frost of the north. The wind howled like the ghosts of the past. He thought of Robert, of Lyanna, of Catelyn and their children, of the lies he'd buried like bones. And for the first time since the fall of the king, he whispered the truth aloud. "Rhaegar, you loved her, didn't you?" But no one answered, because the wall didn't care for truth. It only cared that you stood watch until death. Jon Snow had never felt his heart beat so loud in the cold. He stood frozen at the base of the wall's stairs, the message crumpled in his gloved hand, the wax seal already broken. The words on the parchment blurred before his eyes, but he didn't need to read it again. He'd read it 5 times already, and each time it struck harder than a blade to the gut. Lord Eddard Stark has arrived at Castle Black. He didn't understand. Couldn't. He had watched the sky over King's Landing darken with smoke and rumors. He had heard Maester Aemon whisper of treason and execution. He had imagined his father's head on a spike 100 times during sleepless nights, hating himself for not being there, for not protecting the only man who ever gave a damn about him. But now, this... Jon ran. He didn't care about the other brothers shouting behind him or the warnings to slow down on the icy steps. He flew down into the courtyard like the wind itself had picked him up and carried him. And there he was, older, thinner, weathered like stone, that's seen too many winters, but alive. Ned Stark stood near the stables, wrapped in the black cloak of the watch, eyes lowered, hair uncut, and face half hidden beneath a greying beard. A man of the watch now, just another crow, just another ghost. Jon stopped a few paces away. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Ned turned slowly. When their eyes met, something cracked inside both of them. Years of pain, silence, and buried truths all teetering on the edge of an unspoken cliff. "Jon," Ned said. It wasn't a whisper, but it wasn't strong either. It was the voice of a man whose spirit had been bent, not broken, not yet, and it was enough. Jon closed the distance and wrapped his arms around his father before the cold could steal the warmth of that moment. The embrace was stiff at first, hesitant, but then Ned pulled him close, like a man who thought he'd never feel his son's heartbeat again. "I thought you were dead," Jon whispered into his shoulder. "I almost was." Jon stepped back. "What happened? They said you confessed, that you—" "I did," Ned interrupted quietly, "to protect your sisters, to protect something more important than my pride." Jon looked into his father's eyes and saw shame, but also something else. Fear? Regret? "Your sisters. Sansa's still in the capital. Arya vanished. I don't know where, but if I had died, she would have been alone, helpless. I couldn't let that happen." Jon nodded slowly, but his heart was twisted in a storm of questions. "But now you're here, at the wall. Why didn't you send word? Why didn't you—" "There was no word to send. I didn't want you looking for me. Not yet." Ned's voice dropped lower, heavy with meaning. "Because the truth, Jon, the truth is dangerous, and I've hidden it long enough." Before Jon could ask what he meant, the horn sounded from the east watchtower. 3 blasts, sharp and cold. "White Walkers?" Jon asked instinctively. But Ned's gaze didn't move toward the forest. "No, not yet," he said. "That sounds for riders, men from the King's Road." Jon followed his father's eyes and saw the gates beginning to open. Horses emerged through the swirling snow, and the banners behind them made his stomach twist. The direwolf of Stark, but it wasn't Winterfell's banner, it was black. "The black banner?" Jon asked. Ned's eyes narrowed. "That's not a house banner, that's a warning." Maester Aemon arrived at that moment, his face tight with concern. "Riders from the north. Lady Catelyn has sent men to the wall. Word spreads fast, Lord Stark." Ned flinched slightly at the name. "She's not my lady anymore," he said grimly. "I wear the black now." Jon turned to him. "You think she sent men for you?" "She wouldn't forgive betrayal, even if it was for the children, especially if it was." Jon remembered how fiercely Lady Catelyn had always glared at him, like he was dirt in her home, a living insult. "What do they want?" Jon asked. Ned stared into the snowy horizon. "To remind the wall that the North doesn't forget." The riders approached quickly, their faces pale and unreadable. One of them carried a sealed scroll with the direwolf sigil stamped in crimson wax. He dismounted and handed it to Ned without a word. Ned read it. His lips tightened. Then he folded it, and for a moment the wind carried away only silence. "What does it say?" Jon asked. Ned looked at him, something dark flickering behind his tired eyes. "It says I am no longer welcome in Winterfell." Jon's fists clenched at his sides. "That's not right. You did what you had to do." "Aye," Ned said softly, "but sometimes doing what's right costs you everything." And as the crows circled overhead and the wall groaned in the distance, Jon Snow realized that his father hadn't escaped death. He had just been given a colder kind of grave. The wall had always been cold, but after Ned Stark's arrival, it felt colder still, like the air itself held its breath, waiting for something to break. Jon noticed it first in the way the brothers of the Night's Watch looked at his father. Some saw a fallen lord, others a traitor wearing black as penance, but many of them, especially the older brothers, saw something more dangerous, a man who knew too much and had nothing left to lose. Whispers followed Ned wherever he walked. He didn't speak much, not even during meals in the mess hall. He took his meals in silence, kept his training private, and volunteered for patrols as far north as they would let him go. It was almost like he was trying to vanish into the snow. But John couldn't let him. Late one night, with the wind howling beyond the wall and the fire in the Lord Commander's tower burning low, John stood across from Ned near the armory, fists clenched, heart hammering. "You said there was a truth," John said, breaking the quiet. "Something you've been hiding. Is it about my mother?" Ned's back was to him. He didn't move. "I deserve to know," John said, stepping closer. "You've hidden it from me my whole life. I thought I was a bastard, your shame. And now you're here, wearing black like a criminal, and you still won't say it?" Ned turned slowly. His face looked older in the firelight, not just worn, broken in ways John couldn't explain. "You're not my shame," Ned said. "You were never that." "Then what am I?" There was a long pause. Then, finally, Ned exhaled, slow and deep. "You're not my son," he said, the words cracking in the cold. John blinked, the words hitting him like a hammer to the chest. What? "You're not my son," Ned repeated, "but you are my blood." He stepped forward and placed a hand on John's shoulder. "You are Lyanna's, my sister's. She died giving birth to you. She made me promise to protect you, to raise you as my own, because if Robert ever found out—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. John's mouth opened, but no sound came. His chest felt hollow, like the wind had ripped something out of him and left a hole behind. "Then, who was my father?" he finally managed. Ned's jaw tightened. "Rhaegar Targaryen." John staggered back a step like he'd been punched. "No, He didn't kidnap her," Ned said. "She loved him. They married in secret. You were born in Dawn, in a tower guarded by men who died to keep you safe." John's legs nearly gave out. He leaned against the wall, shaking. "All my life," he said, voice trembling, "all my life I thought I was nothing." "You are not nothing," Ned said. "You are the blood of the dragon and of the wolf." John didn't speak. He couldn't. The weight of it crushed him. Suddenly, a sharp knock broke the silence. Sir Alistair Thorne appeared in the doorway, his face hard. "Ranger returned from Eastwatch. Lord Commander wants you both." They followed Thorne in silence through the winding tunnels of Castle Black, the torches flickering along the stone walls. The air felt heavier than before, not just with cold, but with something darker, something old. Jorah Mormont was already seated at the long table, his face pale, a rolled parchment before him. "There's been movement beyond the wall," he said. "Wildlings are fleeing south, faster than usual. One of our scouts returned, half frozen, babbling about dead things walking." Ned and John exchanged a look. "More tales of whites?" John asked. Mormont nodded grimly. "Aye, but this time it's worse. They're moving as a group, following something or someone." He unrolled the parchment. It was a crude map, but the markings were clear. Large groups of wildlings disappearing, a line of symbols creeping slowly toward the wall. "They're not hiding anymore," Mormont said. "And neither should we." He turned to Ned. "I know you just arrived, Stark, and I know some here question your presence, but we need every sword. If you're still half the man the North remembers, I need you to lead a scouting party." Ned didn't hesitate. "I'll go." John stepped forward. "Then I'm going too." Mormont frowned. "John, I'm going," John repeated. "You'll need someone who knows the terrain. And if this is what I think it is, I can't sit behind a wall and wait for it to come knocking." Mormont nodded after a moment. "Then ride before dawn. Take 6 brothers. Move fast. Stay hidden. If the dead are walking, I want to know where and why." As they left the tower, John turned to Ned, his voice low. You should have told me the truth years ago. Ned's eyes glistened in the moonlight. If I had, you'd be dead. John didn't reply. The night was too dark for words. But in his heart, a fire had lit, not just of anger or grief, but purpose. He wasn't just a bastard anymore. He was something else, something the world would fear or follow, and the truth, no matter how long it stayed buried, had claws. The wall disappeared behind them, like a forgotten monument swallowed by snow and distance. The wind beyond Castle Black didn't just bite. It screamed. It clawed through layers of black wool and leather, seeping into bones, whispering madness in the ears of men who'd never known true silence until now. And yet, Ned Stark rode steady, his back straight, his sword strapped across his back like a burden he'd carried his whole life. Jon Snow followed close behind, his eyes sweeping the white wilderness ahead. They were 6 in total: himself, Ned, Gren, Ed Tollett, Benjen Stark's old squire named Will, and a silent ranger called Tharn, who barely spoke a word since they left. Each man carried enough food for 5 days: steel blades and obsidian daggers, dragonglass pulled from the last reserves of Eastwatch. The snow wasn't normal. It wasn't falling. It was rising, swirling in ghostly shapes, refusing to settle. And the further north they traveled, the worse it became. By the 2nd day, they found the wildling camp, or what was left of it. Dozens of tents, half buried in snow, torn furs, empty bedrolls, no blood, no bones, just gone. Not a single body, Gren muttered, gripping his sword tighter. They didn't run, Ned said quietly, kneeling near the fire pit. They vanished. Jon stared at the prints in the snow, footprints scattered in all directions. Panic. But there were no signs of struggle, no animal tracks, just one set of odd dragging lines that led northeast, deeper into the Frostfangs. They camped under a cliff that night, the fire burning low. Ned sat alone on a rock, his face lit orange by flame, his eyes unfocused. Jon approached slowly. You knew something like this was coming, didn't you? Ned looked up. I saw what was beyond that wall when I was younger, he said. Benjen and I were still boys. We came north with a ranger patrol. They found a corpse, pale, twisted, thought it was a dead wildling. But that night, it walked. Jon sat beside him, the snow cracking beneath them. Why didn't you say anything? Because no one would believe a Stark boy raving about monsters, Ned said with a bitter smile. I told Benjen, he believed. He joined the Watch to stop it. I joined politics. Jon stayed silent for a while. When this is over, he said, you should come back with me. We'll go south, see your grandchildren. Sansa's still alive. Bran and Rickon too. We can rebuild. But Ned only stared into the fire, as if the flame held a truth he wasn't ready to speak. They wouldn't have me, he said, and I don't deserve it. The 3rd day was worse. They reached the forest of the Whispering Pines, and there the cold changed. It wasn't wind anymore. It was watching. The trees creaked with voices that weren't wind. Tharn refused to go further. Will's horse bucked and ran. By sundown, Will was missing. We need to turn back, Ed muttered, glancing around nervously. This place is cursed. But Jon pointed to the ridge ahead. There, smoke. Sure enough, a thin black wisp rose into the sky. A fire. They weren't alone. They moved quickly and quietly, climbing the slope with weapons drawn. At the top, nestled in a hollow, they found it. A circle of corpses, kneeling around a fire that had long since died. Each body was frozen in place, faces twisted in agony, hands covering their ears. Their eyes were still open, wide with terror. One of them was Will. Gren fell to his knees. Ed vomited. Ned knelt by one of the bodies. His hand hovered over its chest. They're warm. Jon blinked. What? They're dead, but they're warm. Then the sound came. A low hum, Not from the air, not from the wind, from beneath. Suddenly, one of the corpses moved. Its head jerked, its fingers twitched. John and Ned stepped back, swords out. Then another stirred, and another. Within seconds, the whole circle of the dead began to rise, slowly, awkwardly. Not like puppets, not like wights. Something was inside them, trying to find a way out. "Fall back!" Ned barked. But the corpses turned to them, not with hunger, with recognition. One of them spoke, a voice like ice cracking. "Stark." Ned froze. His grip on the sword tightened. "You left it buried," the corpse hissed. "You let the lie live. Now it wakes." John stepped forward. "What are you?" The thing smiled, a horrible twitch of frost-bitten flesh. "Not what? Who?" Then the forest exploded into shrieking wind. Snow blinded them. Shadows moved through the trees. And just before everything went dark, John saw the sigil burned into the chest of one of the bodies. A dragon. Twisted. Dead. Then everything vanished into white. The world returned in fragments. Snow, pain, silence. Jon Snow awoke on his back, gasping, his lungs tight with cold and fear. The sky above was grey, the storm gone as suddenly as it had come. Around him, the forest stood still, silent again, but not in peace. It was the silence after a scream. He sat up, heart hammering. The fire pit was nothing but black ash. The bodies gone. So were Gren, Ed, and Tharn. "Father," he shouted, staggering to his feet, scanning the tree line. "Ned!" a groan answered from behind a snow-dusted boulder. John ran to it and found Ned Stark slumped against the rock, blood crusted on his brow, his sword still in hand. "I'm here," Ned rasped, coughing, still breathing. John helped him sit upright, checking him for wounds. Nothing fatal, just bruises, scrapes, and that terrible haunted look in his eyes. "They took them," John whispered, his voice raw. "Gren, Ed, Tharn, they're gone. They're not dead," Ned said, breathing heavily. "At least, not all of them." John didn't want to ask what that meant. He already knew. They sat in the cold for a long time, catching their breath, listening for footsteps that never came. The wind had gone quiet again. Too quiet. Ned finally broke the silence. "You saw the sigil," he said. "On that thing's chest," John nodded. "A dragon, Targaryen." "Not just any dragon," Ned said, his voice cold. "It was Rhaegar's." John felt his stomach twist. "What does that mean?" he asked. Ned stared into the snow, his eyes far away. "It means the past isn't finished with us. And the truth you carry, it's waking things that were buried for a reason." John didn't reply. Because in the back of his mind, something had begun to turn. A memory, faint but persistent. That voice from the corpse. It hadn't spoken like a wight. It hadn't groaned or snarled. It had recognized Ned. It had spoken his name. Whatever these things were, they weren't just dead men walking. They remembered. They had purpose. And that made them more dangerous than anything John had ever faced. They made camp that night in the hollow of a fallen tree. No fire, no light, just silence and steel. John couldn't sleep. He sat with his sword across his lap, ghost curled at his side, eyes glowing red in the dark. Ned stirred occasionally, whispering names in his sleep, Lyanna, Benjen, Catelyn. And once, just once, he whispered, "Rhaegar." John's heart ached. His mind burned with questions. If Rhaegar had loved Lyanna, if Jon had been born of that love, what did that make him? A child of war, a rightful heir, a threat. Morning brought no sun, just a pale grey mist that clung to their skin like ash. They moved west, toward a ranger outpost 2 days away. If they could reach it, maybe they could regroup, warn the others. But the snow played tricks. The terrain shifted, landmarks disappeared, and then halfway through the day, they found another camp. More bodies, more wildlings frozen in place, kneeling, arms outstretched. But this time, in the center of the circle, stood a single wooden pole, and tied to it, frostbitten and barely alive, was Benjen Stark. Jon ran to him, cutting the ropes. Ned was already on his knees, gripping his brother's face in trembling hands. "Benjen," Ned whispered. "Gods, how?" Benjen's lips were cracked. His skin was grey, eyes bloodshot. But he was alive. "They found me," he croaked. "They wanted me to watch. To remember." Ned looked to John. "Help me get him down, now." They laid him gently on the snow, wrapped him in cloaks, fed him water. Benjen shivered violently, but gripped Ned's arm with surprising strength. "They're not whites," he said, voice hoarse. "Not anymore. What are they?" "Shadows," Benjen rasped. "Shadows of the bloodline. They feed on old truths, forgotten names, secrets buried too deep." John stared at him, the chill in his bones no longer from the cold. "They came for me because I knew," Benjen said, eyes flicking to John. "Because of him." Ned stood slowly, his hand on his sword. "They know who John is," he said, "and they're not just hunting him. They're calling to him." Benjen's eyes filled with dread. "You have to choose," he whispered, "before it's too late." "Choose what?" But Benjen had already lost consciousness. John stared at him, blood roaring in his ears. The weight of who he was, of what he might be, suddenly felt unbearable. He wasn't just a Snow, not just a Stark, not just the son of Lyanna. He was Targaryen. And somewhere in the dark, the dead were beginning to remember. The flames crackled softly inside the ranger outpost, casting long shadows across the stone walls. Snow battered the wooden shutters outside, but inside, the three Starks sat in a grim, heavy silence. Benjen lay wrapped in furs on the cot, pale and unconscious. His breathing was shallow but steady. The fever hadn't broken, and John could see the blackening frostbite spreading up his arms. Whatever had kept him alive out there wasn't mercy. It was cruelty in the form of restraint, like they'd preserved him just long enough to deliver a message. Ned hadn't said a word in hours. He sat by the fire, hands locked together, eyes on the flames, as if they alone could answer what he now carried inside him. John paced the room like a wolf caged. "What did he mean?" John asked, breaking the silence. "When he said I had to choose." Ned looked up slowly. The firelight painted deep shadows under his eyes. "He meant your name," Ned said. "Your blood. The name you've never been allowed to claim." John stopped pacing. "I never asked for that name." "But it doesn't matter," Ned said quietly. "Because they already know it." John sat across from him, fists clenched. "Then tell me, say it. Say who I really am." Ned's voice didn't waver. "You are Jon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, born of a marriage in secret. Your name, your bloodline, it makes you the heir to the Iron Throne." Jon stared at him. The words landed like stones. Not because they were lies, but because, deep down, he'd always felt different. Like something inside him didn't belong. And now he understood why. "I don't want the throne," Jon said. "I never did." "That doesn't matter either," Ned replied. "Because the dead don't care what you want. They only care what you are." Jon stood again, the fire's heat no longer touching him. "So what now? Do I run? Hide?" "No," Ned said, rising. "We go back. We warn Castle Black, and then we bury this truth as deep as it will go." But the moment the words left his mouth, the wind outside howled. Not a gust, but a cry. A warning. The door slammed open, and Ghost leapt to his feet, growling. Snow blew into the room, whirling like smoke. From the darkness, a figure stepped forward. It was Ed, or what was left of him. His skin was blue, rimed with ice. His lips were pale. But his eyes, they were still his own. John froze. "Dolorous, Ed?" The thing smiled. "You left me behind." Ned drew his sword. John stepped back, heart hammering. Ed didn't move closer. He simply looked sad. "We remember," he said. "Every face, every lie, every oath broken." From behind him more shadows emerged. Gren, Tharn, and others, wildlings, old Night's Watch brothers. 12 of them. Faces John had seen once before, now twisted by cold and memory. "You cannot bury the truth," Ed said. "Not when it's carved in your blood." John stepped forward, sword drawn, but something inside him pulsed. A beat, not of fear, but of recognition. The dead weren't attacking. Not yet, they were waiting. "For what?" John whispered. "For you to accept who you are," Ed answered, his voice echoing unnaturally. "You were born from fire and shadow, and the shadows want their king back." John's stomach turned. He looked to Ned, but his father was staring straight at Ed, his blade trembling. "Back away, John," Ned said. "Now." But John didn't move. The corpses didn't either. They just watched. Until suddenly, one of them turned its head sharply to the trees. Then another. Then all of them. The dead heard something. And then they ran. No shrieking, no threat. They just scattered into the woods like birds from a fire. John stood frozen, his sword half raised. "What in the hell's—" A new sound filled the night. The horn, one blast, distant then another. Ned stepped out into the snow, sword up, his eyes wide. Lights flickered in the distance. Torches, horses, riders from Castle Black, John said. But when they got closer, he saw the sigil flying high. Not the Black of the Watch, not the flayed man of the Boltons. A wolf, grey on white, and beneath it a lion. John felt his blood freeze. "Sansa," he whispered. "And the Queen." Ned's face darkened. "They've come north." "Why?" John asked. But Ned already knew. "They've come for you." Because the truth didn't just walk in the bodies of the dead anymore. Now it rode under banners. And it was coming home. The courtyard of Castle Black had never seen so many southern banners. Snow swirled down from the sky as the great wooden gates creaked open, letting in a procession of riders wrapped in red and gold, silver and grey. At the front, 2 women dismounted. One wore thick northern furs, auburn hair tucked beneath a hood, her eyes sharp with calculation and memory. The other wore no hood, only a crown of braided silver hair, her Targaryen features made fiercer by the cold that didn't seem to touch her. Sansa Stark, Daenerys Targaryen. They walked forward without speaking, flanked by Unsullied and Northmen alike. Torches flared along the walls, casting long shadows that seemed to lean in to listen. Every crow on the ramparts held its breath. John stood at the base of the stairs, Ghost at his side, his black cloak fluttering behind him. Ned Stark stood just behind him, half-shadowed beneath the archway, his face unreadable. Sansa reached them first. She looked at John for a long time, not as a brother, but as a puzzle she'd finally begun to solve. "You're alive," she said flatly. "They said you disappeared beyond the wall, that you were dead." John offered a faint nod. Almost was. Her eyes shifted to Ned. "And he was supposed to be." Her voice was colder now. "I saw your head on the block. I watched Joffrey give the order. I bent the knee," Ned said simply. "I gave them what they wanted to protect you." Sansa's lip curled. "And left us all thinking you were dead. You let Winterfell fall into the hands of the Boltons. You abandoned your family." "Don't talk to him like that," John said, stepping forward, his voice low. "He did what he had to. We all did." Then Daenerys stepped forward. Her violet eyes locked on John, but her face showed no emotion. "I thought the wall was behind us," she said. "But here you are again, guarding secrets in the snow." John met her gaze, saying nothing. "We followed a trail of corpses," she continued. "Whispers of shadows that speak, of dead men that remember. The North is talking, John. They say the dead walk with your name on their tongues." Sansa folded her arms. "And some say the rightful heir to the Iron Throne hides behind castle walls, pretending to be a bastard." John's jaw tightened. "So that's why you're here?" Daenerys nodded. "You have power in your blood, power that calls to things even I don't understand. The dead are stirring because you exist, and I need to know if you're going to be their king, or mine." A silence settled over the courtyard, sharp as the wind. John looked to Sansa. "Is that why you came too? To drag me back to Winterfell and put a crown on my head?" Sansa's face was unreadable. "I came because the last time I trusted a Targaryen, she burned a city to the ground." Daenerys bristled. "And the last time I trusted a Stark, he drove a dagger into my heart." John stepped between them. "Enough!" He turned to Daenerys. "I never wanted a throne. I never asked to be born into this blood. I took the black to escape it." "Escape it," Daenerys said quietly. "It follows you like a shadow. It wakes the dead. You saw what's coming. And still you refuse to stand as what you are. And what's that? He asked. A name? A symbol? Another Targaryen built for prophecy and fire? No, she said. Your hope. In a world where even death remembers, you are the only thing they still fear. Jon stared at her, heart heavy, then turned to Sansa. I'm not your enemy, but if you think I'm coming south to take your crown, you're wrong. Sansa's voice was cold steel. I don't care about crowns. I care about the North. And right now the North is looking to you, or fearing you, and the difference between those two things might be the death of us all. Behind them, Ned finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried. Your mother died to protect you from this. Your father gave up his crown for love. I buried the truth to protect the realm. Jon turned, confused. What are you saying? I'm saying it's time to stop hiding from who you are. Whether you want it or not, Jon, you carry the weight of two houses, Stark and Targaryen. Jon looked to the snow, then back up at both women. I don't want their fear, he said, and I don't want your throne. Daenerys stepped closer. Then what do you want? Jon looked at her, truly looked. I want peace. I want the dead to stay dead. I want to end this before more graves are filled in my name. Then the horn blew again. 3 blasts. The wall never echoed louder. Everyone froze, not wildlings, not scouts, White Walkers. Jon's eyes locked with Ned's. It's begun! The horn's 3rd blast still echoed when the first shadow appeared on the horizon. They came not with fire or fury, but with silence. The kind of silence that pulled at the soul, that made even hardened men forget how to breathe. From atop Castle Black's ramparts, Jon Snow watched the tree line far beyond the wall ripple like a mirage. Not of heat, but of something cold, ancient, and endless. Figures moved between the trees. Not whites, not yet. White Walkers, dozens of them, eyes like ice shards, skin like frost-bitten marble. And behind them, an army, thousands of dead, the fallen from wildling raids, northern villages, even old rangers, whose names had long been scratched from the records. The dead weren't just marching, they were remembering. Jon turned from the edge, the urgency in his voice cutting through the tension like a sword. Raise the gates, man the catapults, every blade to the wall, now! Soldiers ran, knights. Watch brothers and northern men scrambled together in a chaotic rhythm, loading barrels of fire oil, readying arrows, tipped with dragonglass. Ghost growled low beside Jon, fur raised, red eyes locked on the approaching horde. Sansa stood near the eastern tower, flanked by Brienne, her face pale but hard as steel. Daenerys was already mounting Drogon, the great black dragon roaring above the keep, wings shaking the sky. Ned Stark moved slower than the rest, his age catching up with him under the weight of memory, yet his sword was steady, his eyes grim. You think they're after me, Jon said, meeting his father's gaze. Ned nodded. No, I know they are. Jon gritted his teeth. Then I'll give them what they want. Before Ned could stop him, Jon was gone, descending the stairs into the courtyard, headed toward the front gate. Men shouted after him. Sansa screamed his name. But he didn't look back. He passed rows of soldiers, wide-eyed and shivering, past walls of ice, now trembling under the weight of something unnatural. At the gate, he stopped. He could feel it. That pull, not from the walkers, but from within, the part of him that carried fire, the blood he had denied his whole life, Targaryen blood, and the dead could feel it too. A figure stepped from the front of the horde, taller than the others, dressed in bone-white armor, a great icy spear in hand. But it wasn't the Night King. It was someone worse. It was Rhaegar, or what remained of him. The face was distorted, half-rotted, crowned by a frozen circlet of twisted silver. His once proud violet eyes now glowed with unnatural blue fire. "Jon!" the thing said, its voice echoing like wind over tombs. "My son." Jon stepped forward, stunned. "You're dead." "Yes, and now you must choose." Behind him the gate shook with movement. Sansa and Daenerys had followed, Ned at their side. Drogon circled above, snarling. "You carry two truths," the thing that was Rhaegar said. "One of ice, one of fire. We are drawn to you not for what you are, but for what you will become." Jon's hand clenched around his sword. "I will become nothing like you." The undead prince smiled, lips cracking like old ice. "You cannot run from blood, Jon. Even fire must freeze in the end." Suddenly the horde surged. Whites screamed as they rushed forward, crashing into the defenses, climbing the walls, clawing over the battlements. The battle began in a whirlwind of screams, fire and steel. Jon raised his sword. Drogon dove from the sky, releasing a river of flame that scorched hundreds of whites to ash. But the White Walkers kept coming, untouched, advancing like shadows. Daenerys landed beside Jon, reaching a hand toward him. "Come with me. We can end this together." He looked at her, pain in his eyes. "If I die today," Jon said, "let it be for who I chose to be. Not for blood, not for names." Daenerys looked torn but nodded. "Then fight, for the living." They turned back to the horde. Ned took his place beside his son, sword drawn. Sansa remained behind the line, commanding archers and screaming orders. It was chaos. Fire lit the sky. Men screamed and died, and through it all, the icy figure of Rhaegar moved with slow, terrible grace, heading straight for Jon. Their blades clashed with a sound like shattering glass, steel and ice, father and son. "You are the bridge," Rhaegar hissed, "between fire and shadow. You are the prophecy." Jon snarled. "Then let me burn it." With a roar, Jon plunged his dragonglass dagger deep into the chest of the undead prince. For a heartbeat, time stopped. Rhaegar looked at him and smiled. "You are not ready," he whispered, "but you will be." Then he crumbled to ice and dust. The dead paused, then screamed. They collapsed one by one, not all, but enough. The tide turned, the wall held. By sunrise the battlefield was quiet. Ned leaned on his sword, covered in blood and frost, but alive. Sansa sat beside wounded men, hands red from bandaging. Daenerys stood alone, staring into the snow. Jon knelt in the ash, his chest rising and falling. The war wasn't over, but today death had remembered his name and walked away.